I would thank each and every one of you for joining us this evening. And these remote types of experiences allow us to meet with far more people than ever before. And this is about the fourth or fifth one today for me, and it gives me great pleasure to open this session up. I'm going to be brief because I really do want the most of the time spent listening to Chief Williams and the audience that we have there. I want to first of all thank, I believe I know that Ms. Edmonds, Ms. Long, Eileen Long, Dr. Nicole Carr, and Ms. Carol Cook, our board chair, are on, and that this information was also presented to our board members in a workshop, and I want to thank our board for being so supportive and understanding and really working with this community to continue to try to be totally transparent and working out and sharing a lot of this information with you that we'll be sharing today. And we're very proud of some of the materials and data that you'll be listening to. And so my job today is to but to introduce Chief Luke Williams. And in reflecting on Chief Williams' employment here, many of you don't know, but he came on board with the Pinellas County School District 2 weeks after one of the most horrific tragedies and massacres in the history of our state, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School tragedy. And I remember asking him, it was literally 2 weeks that his official first date was. I said, "Are you up for this challenge?" And I said, because this is going to be a journey like you perhaps have never seen before, a journey centered around safety, a journey centered around school safety, a journey centered around mental health, social services, threat assessment, collaboration and cooperation with multiple police chiefs in our community, with the sheriff's department, and all of those. And there's never been a time where he hasn't wavered and said, "Yes, sir, I'm not only up for it, but this is going to be the challenge, and this is the work that I want to do." And as a result of that, I am very proud to announce that Chief Luke Williams has built very strong relationships with many, if not all, of our 8+ or more police chiefs. I mean, Pinellas County is a unique environment. We have 24 mayors. We have municipalities from Tarpon Springs to St. Pete Beach, and many in between. And it takes us all to really get along with one another and to really work with strong relationships with each other, not only the police chiefs, but also the sheriff's department. Chief Williams has built one of the finest guardian programs in collaboration with Sheriff Galtieri in the state of Florida, so that we're protecting and guarding each and every one of our elementary schools. The chief has set up threat assessment teams at every single school in our district. Along with the right and appropriate personnel, he's also worked to set up a district threat assessment team. And if one thing I looked at that Chief Luke Williams has brought to our district, and that is training of SROs, training of principals, training of SROs and principals, training of school security officers, and so forth. And he's also brought programs and enforced and really promoted diversion programs and to reduce the arrest rates of our students, and also be far more productive in that. And you're going to hear more about that with Chief Williams this evening. Joining Chief Williams is Mr. Clint Herbeck, who's the Associate Superintendent over Operations, which our police force and many other operations fall in that. So it gives me great pleasure, and I just wanted the superintendent to welcome this community and welcome us as a beginning, certainly dialogue, and I think you'll really become enlightened on some of the interagency agreements that Chief Luke Williams has held and also continues to grow. So this is a journey that I'm so glad Chief Williams has chosen to join us on that March 1st of 2018 and continues to really be strong. So Chief, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Clint Herbert first.
Thank you, Chief Williams, and thank you, Dr. Grego. And again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. What I wanted to do first is start with the kind of the purpose and the format of the meeting, and then we'll transition into a history of some of our agreements with law enforcement, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Williams to talk about some of the amendments and the progress that we've made under these agreements as well. And so as we go through and we'll pull up the PowerPoint, please. The purpose and format of the, and I went one slide too much. There we go. Thank you. The purpose and format for tonight's meeting is, again, what we wanted to do is provide information to you regarding proposed amendments to our current agreements with law enforcement. And we want to make sure that we comply with current state statutes. And really, there are changes that have taken place since the tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School that we need to make sure that our agreements are up to date and, again, in compliance with those changes. Chief Williams will share with you some progress that we've made under the existing two agreements that have been in place since 2006 and 2014. We are going to provide an opportunity for you, our participants, to provide insight and to ask questions. And we want to make sure that we get as much insight from you as possible. And to do that, we've also enabled an email address that you can see on your screen there, publiccomments@pcsb.org. And you can please email any comment, any insight, any question that you have during this meeting. And those insights, those questions will be forwarded us to this during this meeting. And we value your time. We know that it's always difficult to get together after a hard day of work, but we will honor your time commitment, and we will end the meeting at 6 p.m. As we look and before we really get into the history of the current MOUs, and again, Chief will discuss the mechanics of those a little bit later on. If we go back to 2006 and 2014, many of you who have joined us tonight or someone in your organization helped draft these two agreements between the board and law enforcement. And those agreements were designed to provide a framework to define the roles of school officials and law enforcement with the goal of providing a safe learning environment while keeping students out of the juvenile justice system. At that time, you believed that we could have safe schools, that we could provide students with the support they need, and that we could do both without having to arrest students for misconduct at school. Thanks to you, your organizations, and to the school board for sharing in that belief and for laying the groundwork for two successful agreements that are still in place today. However, there is still work to do. And recent legislation, as I referenced earlier in response to the tragedy at Stoneman Douglas, now requires us to make some amendments to those agreements. And just as we partnered with you in 2006 and 2014, we want to again partner with you to review and provide insight on these amendments. So as you take a look at your screen, you'll see in 2006, the first agreement that we had between the board and law enforcement. That agreement really clarified the role of school personnel and law enforcement. It really kind of set in place this collaborative nature that we wanted to get to help students navigate through any issue that they had in school. And in 2014, we strengthened that agreement by defining the steps to ensure that minor school misconduct was not criminalized. One of the goals in 2014 was to reduce arrests. And Chief Williams, again, will show and share some data with you in a couple of minutes, our progress on that. Each of the 2006 and 2014 agreements are in effect, and they will remain so unless terminated by both parties. And again, that's the school board and law enforcement. The amendments that we bring with you today and the proposed changes, we'll take a look and we'll terminate both of those agreements. And we'll go to the next slide by combining the 2006 and 14 agreements. And our goal there is, and we have to ask the question, why do we have two agreements? It makes sense to combine them into one. It reduces any chances for oversight and makes sure that people truly do understand. And there's one place to go if anybody has any questions about what the role of law enforcement and what the role of school officials are when dealing with students and school misconduct. The new agreement also adds provisions to address the 2018 and 2019 Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. And Chief Williams will get into those provisions with, again, a little bit more detail in a couple of seconds. And most importantly, the amendments adds language to define how threat assessment teams operate in schools, and especially here in Pinellas County. But one of the provisions that we now have, and it's required by state law, is that all threat assessment teams must have a person on that team with experience in school counseling, instruction, school administration, and law enforcement. And so with that, it kind of lays the groundwork with, and Chief will now go over a little bit more in detail those two agreements, some of the successes we've had, and the proposed amendments. Chief?
All right, thank you, Mr. Herbert. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Grego and Dr. Corbett and each of you all for joining us this evening. Our work is very important, and I think we all have the commonality of wanting to make sure that we give the best opportunities for our children. So the general topics of the agreements that we have, first is maintaining the safety of the educational environment. One of the first districts, or Pinellas was one of the first districts in the state of Florida to enact all parts of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. The threat assessment process and the use of the Sandy Hook Promise to reduce the threats and identify students who need specialized services. We also use robust mental health programs in all our schools with district-wide support. And we incorporate our school mental health experts as part of our mental health evaluations to reduce the number of Baker Acts. So utilization of the district staff has been made possible whenever we have to do assessments. And it provides more in-depth, persons with more in-depth training to handle those very important and sensitive issues. We also looked at the reduction of the student interviews on campus by law enforcement officers. And basically, the law enforcement and the school administrators understand that the youth are not to be interviewed at school by law enforcement officers for off-campus incidences. So it is very clear that the school shouldn't be used as a place to interview kids or students who have committed offenses off campus simply because the officers know that they're going to be at school. And we also wanted to highlight the cooperation in the investigation of child abuse and neglect cases, which allows the school personnel to be with our youth doing interviews if the CPI investigators feel such presence will not compromise the investigation. Another general topic is that we wanted to make sure that the school handling of non-criminal misconduct was basically reduced, and it kept law enforcement out of it. And what you'll see on the screen is quite interesting. As Mr. Herbert mentioned, when we went into the first agreement back in 2014, you'll note that the year prior, or the school year prior to that, there were 633 arrests. And because of the agreements that we've had in place, you'll see that there's been a steady decline in the number of arrests that have taken place. Now, of course, one arrest is too many, but as long as we're able to continue to address those issues, and again, it takes not only the district and law enforcement, but it also takes the whole community. And that's part of the reason why all of you all have been invited, because of your vested interest in the safety and the education and the futures of our children. So if you look at the numbers of the 2019-2020 school arrests, the last year we had, we went from 633 arrests in 14 to 273 arrests. Now, granted, we ended school in mid-March or late March due to the pandemic, so therefore the numbers are skewed because there was no school during that time from March until June. However, given if you do the calculations, it appears that we would have, again, come under the arrest numbers for the previous year. Also, currently, for the current school year, 2 weeks into the second semester, we've actually had 56 arrests. And I think because of the agreements, that is a process that has shown some success, that the agreements do work. And then finally, we want to encourage alternatives to criminal referrals and arrests. So Pinellas is a state leader in issuing juvenile civil citations in lieu of arrests. And the Carruthers Institute rated the Pinellas County school system an A district for the highest rate of utilization in the state, which was at 97%. Other Bay Area districts earned a D or lower, with the highest rate of utilization being 61%. So if we go to the next slide, what it shows is data from the Department of Juvenile Justice. And it shows that Pinellas County is #1 in the state as far as being able to use the pre-arrest diversion program. And then it also shows how we compare with the other counties in the Tampa Bay region. And again, Pinellas County is doing a great job, and we're seated at #1. On the next slide, what you'll find too is that it illustrates the arrest diversions by the school districts. And Pinellas County School District, again, ranks #1 in the state. And not every action is a diversion eligible action, but you can see that we have done very well when compared to other school districts, both in the Tampa Bay area and then the 10 largest districts in the state. And I've quoted the Carruthers Institute. If we go to the next slide, there, yeah, thank you. So the Carruthers Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that conducts research, crafts solutions, and leads advocacy on emerging issues for the purpose of data-driven social change. This is a local institute, and actually, I'm not going to read each one of these findings for you, but I'd like to focus your attention on the highlighted key finding #5, which says that Pinellas and Miami-Dade counties continue to be the gold standard in Florida for using pre-arrest diversion civil citations as an alternative to arrest for common youth misbehavior. And then on the next slide, again, Pinellas County arrest rate for first-time common youth misbehavior, which equal to 1% of all arrests. And when you compare that to our neighbors across the bay, their first-time incidents for arrests were 53% of the time for first-time minor offenses. And then the following slide basically shows how we compare to other counties in the state, basically in the near Tampa Bay region. And it illustrates that the other counties with the number of arrests for the first time acts, and just remember that Pinellas County had 8 as compared to the the county that's in the first position, which had 397 first-time minor acts in which the student was arrested. So the part that I wanted to spend a little more time on is the new provisions of the Marjorie Stoneman Public Safety High School Act, which affects our agreement. And again, these provisions are new based upon Florida state statute. So basically, it ensures that a threat assessment team will have the required law enforcement team, and that the law enforcement agencies will provide a law enforcement officer for their schools. So as Dr. Grego mentioned, each of our schools has a law enforcement officer or deputy assigned to the threat assessment team. The purpose for that is, if you think back to the shooting down at Marjorie Stoneman, there are some indicators that we know were missed, that if there had been proper attention paid to those indicators, that that could have been avoided and there could have been some help given to that particular student. It also ensures that the threat assessment team meetings, including law enforcement, are privy to necessary student information to perform the work of the threat assessment team, and that such information will not be unlawfully disclosed to others. It also ensures that the law enforcement agencies will notify the Pinellas County schools if a school or other site is placed on a closed campus. So a closed campus is if there's a law enforcement activity that's happening in close proximity to the school, which may potentially cause a threat to the school. So we require that those agencies call Pinellas County Schools Police so that we can make sure that our students are safe. And there's a difference between a closed campus and a lockdown. A lockdown means there's something that's happening physically on the school, in the school campus, and it causes the students and the staff to take the appropriate actions of either sheltering in place or fleeing based upon the criteria. But a closed campus is something that's not happening on the campus, and the reason why we want to know about what's happening is because we have students that could be out at PE, and there could be dismissal times that we want to be able to make sure we're able to coordinate that and keep our students safe. We also want to, on the next slide, ensure that the law enforcement officers complete the Pinellas County Schools form related to parental contact and school staff presence before student interviews when appropriate. It also wants to ensure that each law enforcement agency will send Pinellas County school procedures regarding arresting a student 10 years of age or younger. Now, as far as this form goes, it is our duty to make sure that there's representation for a student that is being interviewed. And if the parent is not available or the guardian is not available, then a representative from the school will sit in those interviews with that student if possible. And if that does not occur, and this is extremely rare, if that doesn't occur, then the individual agency needs to send me a form explaining to me why did that did not occur. And I can tell you, since I've been here with the district, that's only occurred one time. So that is extremely rare. So with that, we want to leave time for discussion and any questions that you all may have. So at this point, I'm going to open it up and see if there's anyone who has their hand up. And it appears that Ms. Eugene has her hand up.
Yes, Ms. Eugene, if you'd unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging me. I do have a couple questions, and forgive me, I'm looking at the time. I think one of the main questions I have is that we are only allotting an hour for such a important conversation. That's my first concern. My second concern is that the data that was provided, it was broken down in a way that we are unable to see the racial disparities of that data. And my question is, one, is that available? And two, if it was not completed, I'm curious as to why. I think it's very important that we need to see if, in fact, only one child under 10 was arrested. Well, what race was that child? And I would think that one child under 10 being arrested is one too many. My second question is really tied to the notification. So this particular agreement was on the schedule to be voted on January the 12th. And I have petitioned a few of our local parents, actually to be specific, 10, and they had no notification of this. And this is specifically affecting their children. So there is a concern that such an important agreement is being voted on by the school board. It has been negotiated. It's in writing. It's to be signed off on, and our public at large has no information outside of it being noted on the school board's website. So that's a concern, and I believe I probably had 3 concerns, but I would like for all 3 to be addressed because all of them are concerns.
Okay, I can tell you that as far as the racial breakdown, that information is available. That has actually been a topic of conversation with the Disproportionate Minority Contact Committee. I think Trinia Cox is a part of that group. And I can tell you that one of the focuses that I've been focusing on since I've been in the district is identifying what areas are our kids being arrested in, where they're being arrested, and for what reasons. Now, I can tell you that there is some work to be done as it relates to disproportionate arrest. And I can tell you that as far as training and communications and the meetings that we've had with the sheriff's office, with the police departments, as well as with the district members, to include the principals and the area superintendents, we're able to identify that there is some work to be done as it relates to the disproportionate number of African Americans, specifically males, that are being arrested. But I can also tell you that those numbers, as well as the other numbers, are on a downward trend. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's not work to be done, because there is work to be done, and it's to be done by everybody. It's not just specifically a district or a law enforcement issue. It's a community issue, and I think that's why we're all on this call, and that's why you all have been selected to be here. I think that you may have misunderstood me when I talked about the 10-year-old. We have not arrested any 10-year-olds. We have 0 arrests of 10-year-olds. What I was referring to is that there's a policy that and a part of the agreement is that each agency has to supply us with a policy as it relates to interactions with children of that age, because we all have concerns from the sheriff on down. We have concerns about law enforcement interactions with very young children. So no, we have not arrested any 10-year-old kids. So if that's what you heard, that is not what I
Okay,
said.
and that's fantastic. And I'll just do a follow-up question and allow others to jump in, because I know that this is a burning topic for many. The one thing that you just said that stood out to me is that this is a community conversation. And so that is key. It is a community conversation. However, this proposal was negotiated and put into play and set to be voted on with absolutely no feedback. I know from a key stakeholder in this community, which is the NAACP, and I'm sure other key stakeholders. So you're absolutely correct. This is a community conversation, and this should have been a community negotiated proposal along with the district and our local law enforcement. And that's concerning, because whomever the school board member was that withdrew the proposal, thank God for them, because this would have been voted on and it would have been issued out and the community would have been blind to it. And that's not how things should be done.
Thank you for your comment. Any other questions?
Zeb had his hand up. Do you have a question, Zeb?
Yeah, I did have a question, but it kind of got answered. I was kind of concerned about what would precipitate a 10-year-old getting arrested.
No. Let me reiterate. Let me make this perfectly clear. Can I make this perfectly clear to everyone? There has been no 10-year-olds.
That's why I put my hand down, because you made it clear.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Atkinson.
All right. No problem.
I see Mr. Welch, Kenneth Welch has his hand up.
Thank you, Chief, and good evening to everyone. I just wanted to follow up on President Eugene's comments about the disparities. I think that's a really good point. I thought I saw Judge Moore on the call, and we co-chaired JDAI for several years. And while it's true that the number of diversions is going in the right direction and we're doing very well, the disparity still exists in terms of the number of kids who are being entered into the justice system. So, and that's been consistent throughout probably the 10 years that we've been working on that. My question is, what are the main tools that we use to reduce the arrests?
I know one of the main things we want to do is that we want to train and educate the officers first and foremost, and then also the school staffs, because one kid, the way they speak may be different than what you're used to, but that doesn't make it wrong. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're educating all aspects, everybody who has a touch with our kids. We do training to include all our bus drivers, all the teachers, the area superintendents, as well as the principals. And I can tell you that, again, when I came on with the statistics, I looked at a page of numbers that wasn't really telling me much, except there were a page of numbers. So Mr. Herpy and I got together and we wanted to look and see what were some of the causations, where were some of the problem factors may be. I've been able over time to work that out better, so we're able to see the numbers. We can see where some of the issues are, and we've already started educating the principals and the area superintendents on making sure that a behavior that happens in Tarpon Springs should be handled the same way in St. Petersburg, but we also need to be using the lowest possible approach to it, which, again, we talk about these agreements that have been in place since 2006 and 2014. It has shown that it works. And so I think that with the state statute additions, it was incumbent upon us to make sure that we're in compliance with what the state statute says that we have to do. So there is work to be done, and I think that those of you all, and I think most people on the call know me, is that when I put my mind to something, and I'm all about being fair and making sure that we're doing the very best we can as a district. And I can tell you we have some very dedicated men and women here to do the work to make sure our kids are educated and treated fairly.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes. Yeah, I think Dr. Davis has his hand up.
Clint.
Yes, this is Rick Davis. I just want to make a couple of observations because this is a concerning issue and it's been that way for a long time. And the organization that I represent has been involved in both the 2006 and the 2014 efforts along this regard. I am, on the one hand, appreciative of the fact that the numbers are trending in the right direction. That needs to continue to be the case. I do make some distinction between law enforcement authority to arrest someone irrespective of whether they're in school grounds or not. So when I look to the district, what I'm hoping to see, which we have seen over the years, the district effort to at least work with law enforcement so that those numbers continue to trend and we have less and less of these occurrences. But I know there's a lot of effort that goes in behind these reducing numbers. And I just want to encourage those key people, Chief Williams and others in the district leadership, for continuing their effort to make sure that those numbers continue to trend in the right direction. I think that that's the sign of improvement. I remember distinctly some time ago, we had a very interesting conversation about how to document this. And I had an opportunity to review the document, and one area kind of stand out for me is on page 10, item number 39, where it states the school board forms relating to parental contact and or school administration presence during interviews shall be completed when appropriate by law enforcement officers conducting these on-campus interviews. And I remember some of the real heated discussions around the issue because we've always been concerned about the idea, the picture, if you will, of a law enforcement officer interviewing a young child privately. And there's no adult there to advocate or to represent that child's interests. So I recognize that we've come from a long way, and I'm glad that there's only one incident in recent years that we can even account for. And I am hopeful that there will be none as we continue to move forward because of all of the work that has been put into it. So I just wanted to make that observation, and I appreciate all of the work from not just COCOEP, but some other community organizations like the NAACP that have been very concerned about this. But I see progress, and I think we need to continue to move in the right direction.
And Chief Williams, we do have a question that came in from, I believe, the email. And the question is, the city of St. Petersburg has started using social workers for some of its calls. Social workers would make way more sense in our schools. When can this shift happen? And the answer is it already has started happening. And one of the things that if we go back, and I was a school administrator prior to 2006, prior to the first agreement being put in place, and I won't say it was commonplace, but it happened way more often than it should when a student would act out in class or have a difficulty or they were just having a bad day, and instead of an administrator or a guidance counselor going to see that student, oftentimes the school would ask for the law enforcement, the SRO, to go down there and talk to a student, and that was never a good situation. So the agreement put in place in 2006 really helped stop that. But since that time, we've been able to staff our schools with social workers. We have school psychologists in place. We're working hard to increase the number of behavior specialists at each school. Chief Williams did talk about how he is going out right now and training principals. And one of the points that he trains them in is making sure that student misconduct, when it's minor, or when a student's just having a bad day and they're acting out, and it may not even be at the level of misconduct, that the school needs to handle that. And the school needs to handle that with someone with that type of a training. Again, a social worker, a psychologist, behavior specialist, or guidance counselor, and sometimes it's even that student's favorite teacher. All of those things can be put in place. They have been put in place. And one of the things that we are seeing some success with is over the past year, we've made some strides in making sure that students who have either spoken or exhibited signs that they may cause self-harm, which could be elevated to a Baker Act with law enforcement involvement. We're making sure that, again, social workers, school psychologists, and people like that are getting a chance to talk to that student first before we just call in law enforcement and risk moving that Baker Act process down the road. So again, so the shift has started to happen. We're seeing successes with it, especially at the elementary school level, and hopefully that answers your question.
Ms. Cox has her hand raised.
Here. A few things I want to mention. First of all, I want to thank the chief for being very transparent. As chair of DMAC, District Monitoring Advisory Committee, we've been looking at student discipline, for some time, and we are very appreciative of the trend that we're seeing less school arrest. That's to be celebrated. However, the disparity is great and wide, and still demands our attention. We have about 19% of our student body, Pinellas County schools, about 19% are students of color, African Americans, and yet they are representing pretty close to 67% of the school arrest. We still are concerned about that. We're concerned about the disorderly conduct being one of the categories with 59%, and I'm giving you the data from 2018 to 2019. And I want to applaud the chief for being very straightforward and transparent about this and saying this is not the answer. It has to do with mentorship, school-based and community-based. It has to do with the fact we need to identify early these students who are struggling with self-regulation and get them involved in an evidence-based social-emotional learning program. We need to do this like yesterday. And we appreciate what efforts are going on in that area, but we have to make certain that these things are standardized. My comment, I know time is passing, I'm looking forward to, and please give me some idea as to when we might look at, for Pinellas County Schools, a standardized, shall we say, disciplinary matrix. Unfortunately, certain campuses do what they wish in terms of their school conduct programs, if you will, how they use SROs. Are we getting closer to, or do we recognize the need for a standardized disciplinary matrix that we can ask all school campuses to follow? Are we getting close to that? That's the question.
A standardized matrix. I'm sorry, we got some feedback, but a very good point. Whenever you have a matrix, it's open to interpretation. And so I think, again, I'd like to partner with everyone on this call to come up with ideas and means of being able to identify those things that are challenges that we can address and work together as a team. And if you have ideas on what you think that should look like, please, let's get, and we communicate often, but let's make sure that we talk about that type of process. I know that in law enforcement there are various matrices that are there, but I also know that when you're dealing with a matrix, you also have to have the ability to operate with, not on going from point A to point B, but sometimes you have to go from A to C. And so we want to make sure if you have ideas on how to do that, we can discuss that. But I can tell you that from the law enforcement perspective and from the district perspective, we depend on the student code of conduct. And there's a lot of training that goes on with that annually with the not only the school staff, but also with law enforcement as well. So part of what you're probably looking at is already in the conduct student code of conduct, but we also need to do the training with the officers to make sure that they're doing those things as well. So I'd welcome to be able to talk to you further about that.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much.
Miss Eugene?
Thank you again. Ms. Trinia mentioned something in regards to disorderly conduct, and I noticed in the proposed agreement that it's now requiring educators to report certain infractions to campus police, inclusive of campus disturbances and disorderly conduct, and then leaving it in the hands of that particular police officer to make a judgment call on whether that student will have some type of a involvement on a criminal level and or move it back over to the educators. So I'm curious as to how that will look, and if in fact you guys are relying on the educators to make the judgment call, or are you coming in and saying these automatically need to be reported to us, and then we will make that judgment call. And my final question is, this particular agreement, you're bringing it to us at this point. Is this just for us to voice concerns and questions, or is this moment our moment to say we're going to table and now you guys are going to collaborate with us so that we can really dissect it and give key feedback and hopefully reconfigure how this particular agreement looks?
Give me the first part of your question again, please.
In the agreement itself, it specifies that.
Okay, I got you. I remember. I'm sorry. So basically, when you're dealing with the new statute, what Marjorie Stoneman requires is that when you're dealing with sensor data or incidents that occur on the school campus, the safety of the school campus environment, it's required that we make those reports. Now, I can tell you that in the conversations that we've had with the sheriff and the other chiefs of police, simply because a person is notifying law enforcement of something that occurred, law enforcement's not going to do any more than what we have been doing, and we're going to leave those decisions to be a joint decision by the school administration and that officer. So simply because you're reporting more doesn't mean that there's going to be more arrests, and we've made that perfectly clear from the leadership of each law enforcement agency and the sheriff, that simply because the statute says that you need to report everything to the police officers, that they're not going to be making police reports on those things. So our goal is to make sure that we're handling these circumstances at the least possible level, which includes the officer's suggestion that this person go into a diversion program, or they go to the Face It program, or there's some alternative that's short of arrest. So we're not there's not a school resource officer that goes to school that looks to arrest a kid out of school on any day. It's just that the circumstances present themselves, and officers have to be able to address it. But what we're encouraging everybody to do is that we address it as a team with the school administrator and the input, and handle it on the extreme lowest possible level that we can with our students, and that's evident in the numbers that we see with the arrests going down.
Okay, and thank you for that, Chief. I just want to make note, however, that the 2006 agreement states specifically that that it should not, those simple infractions should not be reported to law enforcement. However, the new agreement coming in is saying that all of these should be reported to law enforcement.
It became a statutory requirement.
Okay.
It became a statutory requirement, so therefore they're reported. But that doesn't mean that the officers are going to be making arrests on those.
And if I could add, ma'am, that's one of the more difficult things that we're dealing with the recent legislation around Stoneman Douglas, and I know that's one of the things that Chief is really concentrating on with his training. And the concern comes not only from the Stoneman Douglas Commission, but also there's a grand jury looking at the states and school districts' reactions and their actions in implementing the laws with the Public Safety Act. And one of the things that there's been some concern is that, and there's been evidence in other school districts that principals kind of cover up things that they should be reporting. And it's very clear that a principal should be reporting anything that's considered a threat to the safety and security of that campus. And so the language in the law and the language we've been asked to incorporate with this one makes sure that there's not so much of an onus on the principal to try to make that decision whether or not something should be reported or not. It's really kind of, let's go ahead and report. Let's have a conversation with our law enforcement partners. Let's make sure that we make the right decision and then move forward. And in most cases, and again, when you look at this agreement, fortunately, we do have in place that there is that understanding that when a principal or a school administrator brings something to a law enforcement officer and says, this just happened, what do you think? That law enforcement officer has orders in the agreement itself, and they have orders from their chief that they should do everything they can to make sure that that action does not become a law enforcement issue. And, you know, Chief Williams is the chairman of the Pinellas Police Standards Council, and I know that he leads that meeting every single month. And they have this discussion every month. I've been fortunate to be able to observe some of those meetings, and they do have this discussion about this to make sure that the SROs are really having a meaningful conversation with principals.
Okay, thank you for that. I just, you know, there's a gentleman that used to work with you guys by the name of Nick Grasso, and I always remember Mr. Grasso, who is a great friend of mine, saying we should always err to the side of prevention over punishment. And I just want to make sure that we keep that as the focal point, that we are ensuring that we are erring to prevention and not automatically shifting over to punishment. And I'll go ahead and be quiet now, but I'm really concerned about this.
We're absolutely there. We're absolutely there.
Miss Young, you can unmute your mic.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Turnage-Young. I'm senior counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. We appreciate the opportunity to review and comment on this proposed agreement. I agree with President Eugene of the St. Petersburg NAACP that students, parents, and educators should have a meaningful opportunity to weigh in before the agreement is voted on. We are concerned because the language of the agreement does seem to allow law enforcement officers to supplant the role of educators in guiding student behavior. We're also concerned that the agreement allows for students and children to be interrogated without parental consent and without parental notice. That said, Chief Williams, I do have a couple of particular questions. I'm curious about why certain language was removed or is being proposed to be removed from the current agreement. So consistent with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, the currently operative agreement states that zero tolerance policy should not be rigorously applied to petty acts of misconduct, and also consistent with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. The current agreement defines what actually constitutes petty acts of misconduct. And it states that those acts that do not pose a direct threat to the safety of students, staff, volunteers, or other persons, or a threat of harm to school district property. Such acts include, but are not limited to, minor fights and disturbances. Those are petty acts of misconduct. And the 2014 agreement that is currently in place has provisions for how those things shall be dealt with, and has provisions basically saying that those things should be dealt with by educators. And Chief Williams, I'm wondering if you could explain to us why the 13 law enforcement agencies involved in negotiating this agreement saw fit to remove that language.
Well, I think the language is understood, and basically we were consolidating those the languages, but it is understood through all the agencies and the chiefs and the sheriff is that we're not looking at zero tolerance, and that we're trying to handle and reduce the number of arrests and make sure that the school administrations are doing what's right for the kids as well as the officers. So although the language may have changed, the spirit is still there. And if there's something or any suggestion that you have as far as language that you'd like to send for us to consider, I'd be more than happy to send that forward and take a look at it for any suggestions that you have. But I can tell you that we're not looking to arrest more children. We really are not. And I think that the agreements were again consolidated to keep from having 3 agreements, but then also adding the new statutory requirements from Marjorie Stoneman. So if there are some words and some language that you feel would be more conducive to saying what you think it needs to say as a community, we'll be more than happy to take a look at that. And thank you.
I'm delighted to hear that, Chief Williams, that you are open to adding that language back in and to taking steps to make sure that that language is back in. I have a similar question about some language from the 2006 agreement that's currently in place that was also removed. So the 2006 agreement states that simple batteries that occur between students at the elementary level will be considered as a special circumstance, so that reporting of these offenses shall be limited to instances where parents and legal guardians of the victim child requested it be reported. If it's possible, consistent with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, would you consider adding that language back in since it was taken out?
I would ask that if you have suggestions for language that you would want us to consider, please send that to Mr. Kapersky, and we will look at that. I can tell you that as far as elementary school age children, that's handled totally different. And again, that's a school type of action that needs to take place, and law enforcement does not get involved in those situations. But yes, if you would send whatever suggestions you have, we'll most certainly take a look at it.
Thank you, Chief Williams. We're happy to support.
You're welcome.
There are no more questions or hands up at this moment. I think we have, do we have someone?
Yes.
Okay.
Brother John Muhammad. Sorry, you can go ahead.
Brother Mohammed, your hand's raised. Okay, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, his mute is.
And your mic is muted.
Your mic is muted. Your mic is open, but I do not see any levels coming from your microphone, so you may want to check your computer. What you could do is if you would put your question in the Q&A box. Mr. Welch?
Mr. Welch?
Just one last general question. Are y'all aware of any proposed legislation in the upcoming session that would impact what you're doing here?
And I can answer that, Chief. No, I'm not aware of any. We do go over the proposed legislation. We get updates sometimes daily, but definitely weekly. And I haven't seen anything that's going to have a substantial change to this. If there is, I would imagine it would probably be centered around threat assessment teams. But again, we haven't seen anything yet.
Okay, thank you.
I see that Trinity Cox has her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to know going forward, what's our timeline here in terms of providing input, and where do you have, how do you proceed from here in terms of key milestones? You know, community input, shall we say a rewrite, if you will, placing it back on the agenda for approval or disapproval with the school board, so we can be aware of time-sensitive, timelines here. So if you could just share that, I would appreciate it.
Actually, as far as a timeline, my next meeting with the Standards Council is this coming Wednesday. It's the second Wednesday of each month. So if you can get information to you, especially with the attorneys, if you all can get those suggestions to us, I will be addressing them on Wednesday with that new information that we can consider. And I would propose that I think most of you all have my contact information. If you don't, please don't. We don't want this just to be an issue. If there's something that we can work on and have discussions about, I think you all know that you can contact me and we'll work on some solutions. So we shouldn't have to wait until there's a meeting that's called, or it seems that there's a problem to communicate and address any issues that you may see.
So with no more hands up, I can't, thank you, Chief. I couldn't have said it any better. It's a perfect way to say that. Please don't make this a one-time affair, a one-time opportunity. If anytime you have any concerns or questions, please let us know. You can contact either myself by email or Chief Williams. We'll definitely be working together very closely to make sure that this agreement is right for our students, it's right for the community, it's right for our schools, and it's and again, I'll repeat myself, but number one, it has to be right for our students. So with that, I think again we have no more questions coming in or hands up. But thank you again so very much. Let's stay in contact with each other, and we will make sure that we are in contact with you, and we have some information coming to you so that you do know the next steps in this process as we bring it forward to a board approval. Thank you and good night.